If you saw a ferocious bear standing in the middle of the road and you had places to go, what would you do? One brave police officer faced this dilemma. However, he was soon forced to act quickly. State Trooper Thomas Owens needed to make sure that all the drivers who were stuck in traffic were safe from the claws of a fierce bear in the middle of the road. Eventually, though, he realized why the beast wouldn't move. Just a few years ago, Thomas Owens never thought he'd have to deal with a gigantic bear in the middle of a busy road. Back when he was a senior at high school, many of his friends were moving on to college where they would eventually become doctors, lawyers, and teachers. As for him, he was planning on becoming a state trooper. Fast forward a few years and Thomas is now part of the New Hampshire State Police. After establishing himself as a respected member of the New Hampshire State Police, the day eventually came when Thomas would have to confront the fierce bear. One day, an anonymous source reported to the police force that a bear was spotted on a road close to Bretton Woods Ski Resort. In collaboration with Carroll Police, Thomas drove down to the reported location. One thing's for sure, this isn't the first time that a bear has caused problems here. Bretton Woods is a majestic part of the world. Spanning over 700 acres of land, this is a beautiful area that not only attracts skiers, but is also home to a wide variety of wildlife. With over 200 species of bird living in this region, as well as many sightings of bears, it should come as no surprise that these woods are well protected. Surely enough, Thomas was about to see something the likes of which he'd never seen before. As he drove toward the location where the bear reportedly stood, Thomas couldn't believe how many cars were waiting in traffic. The long lines of cars was stretching for miles. Thankfully, as a state trooper, he was able to pass through to see what all the fuss was about. By the time he arrived at the scene, the entire space had been blocked off. Even when he was many yards away from the bear, he could see that she posed a potential threat. Obviously, police treat any case where there's a bear involved very seriously. There's no denying that bears can be extremely dangerous if one gets too close to them. The black bear was huge, and if she was disturbed, there was a good chance that she'd act violently. As a state trooper, Thomas had undergone training in how to deal with dangerous creatures, including bears. However, there was one thing he needed to do before attending to the bear. After briefly assessing the situation from a distance, Thomas began to shout to the driver in front to turn around, head back the other way, and to pass the message down the long line of traffic. The police also put up large steel sheets in order to ensure a safe blockade between the drivers and the bear. While the drivers were now fairly safe and began to go the other way, Thomas was still there, waiting to confront the bear. As Thomas tried to get closer to the bear, he noticed something strange about her. For some reason, she was pacing back and forth from one side of the road to the other. It was something he'd never seen before. Usually a bear might sit still in similar cases, but this was a unique situation. Thomas couldn't quite put his finger on why the bear was moving in such a peculiar way. Why not just move off the road? Now there were no cars in sight, and Thomas was still a fair amount of distance away from the bear. At this point, he seized the opportunity to get even closer to the bear, who was still pacing back and forth. Even though Thomas got so close, the bear was far too preoccupied to even notice him. The state trooper wondered what could be possibly troubling the bear. Soon enough, though, Thomas understood why the bear was behaving so strangely. It was at this stage that Thomas finally understood the reason behind the bear's irrational behavior. She had not one, not two, but 3 cubs. They were all following her as she went from one side of the road to the other and back again. It was clear that despite their small stature, the 3 cubs were very strong and could keep up with their humongous mother. However, the next thing that Thomas saw truly explained the mother's behavior. While it's surprisingly rare for a mother bear to have 3 cubs at once, Thomas was amazed to see that a 4th one was also at the scene. However, the little one wasn't moving, which immediately explained why the mother and her other cubs were pacing back and forth. While they were determined to move along, the mother kept noticing that the 4th cub wasn't getting up. It was at this stage that Thomas witnessed something remarkable. Thomas was sort of lost for words when he saw the mother's maternal instinct creep in for her 4th cub. As she walked up to the motionless bear cub, she lowered her head and nudged him with her nose. In fact, she'd been constantly doing this every time she paced from one side of the road to the other. However, the cub still didn't move. Thomas was in for another big shock when the mother bear threw another curveball his way. It was clear that the mother bear assumed that her cub was a lost cause due to his lack of movement. Thomas knew that something wasn't right, but simply had to watch the moment play out. After a few minutes of pacing and nudging, the mother ultimately decided to move on with her other cubs and return to the woods. Naturally, Thomas was upset with what happened. However, from where he could see, the cubs still looked very much alive. Now that the coast was clear, Thomas knew that he needed to act quickly. He rushed over to the abandoned cub to check his condition. Knowing all too well that the mother bear could return and attack him, he quickly inspected the cub. There it lay, with its eyes closed and unable to move. Then Thomas couldn't believe his eyes when the cub finally managed to get up on all fours. Had he finally recovered? Despite getting up and appearing to have recovered, the bear cub lost balance once again and collapsed to the ground. It was clear to Thomas that the cub was sick and needed immediate medical attention. So he picked the poor thing in his arms and rushed him back to his car. He drove the cub to the New Hampshire Fish and Game Center. However, it wouldn't take long before Thomas picked up the cub again and went somewhere else. Thomas and the officers at the New Hampshire Fish and Game Center knew that the little cub needed proper medical attention. As a result, they decided to transport him to a rehab center in Lyme, New Hampshire. As soon as they arrived at the center, a team of vets and nurses took the bear cub off his hands and attended to him. Despite working on the cub all night long, they had some updates that Thomas didn't want to hear. It was clear that the cub's chances of survival were hanging on a thread. While the vets and nurses were taking care of the cub, Thomas knew that it surely would have perished had the authorities not arrived at the scene in time. Moreover, had the mother stayed with the sick cub, she could have put the rest of her cubs in danger too. Then Thomas learned something mind-blowing about the mother bear that had happened that day. As Thomas's story became the talk of the town, officials eventually broke the news to him that the mother bear who he had encountered earlier in the day actually had 5 cubs with her at the beginning. This meant that on the same day she had lost not 1 but 2 of her litter. Whether she lost the other one or abandoned it was unclear. At any rate, Thomas knew exactly what he needed to do next. Determined to bring this broken family back together, Thomas organized a meeting with a team of state troopers and planned a search. While the 4th cub was still in medical care, Thomas wouldn't rest until they found the 5th one. They explored the woods with a group of canine units who would surely be able to sniff out any form of life. After many long hours of searching, Thomas's efforts were brought to a surprising conclusion. Amazingly, when everything was said and done, Thomas and the Carroll police managed to locate the 5th cub's whereabouts. It would come to pass that the cub was actually located close to where his mother had been pacing back and forth just a couple of days beforehand. Needless to say, Thomas was absolutely delighted to find the little one. It wouldn't take long before the state trooper received even more good news that would bring this story to a close. Thankfully, after a couple days of intensive care, both the 4th and 5th bear cub made a full recovery, and the nurses were able to bottle feed them in peace. However, both Thomas and the vets knew that they couldn't hang on to the cubs forever. While both of them appearing to be very stressed when first found, they were now happy and healthy. Yet Thomas knew that he needed to do one more thing for the adorable cubs. Now that the cubs were healthy and happy, Thomas and the rehab center are determined to reunite them with their mother, helping to make this family complete once again. However, they'll need to remain at the center in order to reach full strength. Only then will the center release the 2 bears back into the wild. While the reunion hasn't happened just yet, Thomas was in store for some good news in light of his heroic adventures. Not only did the New Hampshire police praise Thomas for his vigilance in caring for the bear cub, but many people on social media also had great things to say about Thomas, who had gone above and beyond to make sure that nobody, no matter how big, small, or furry, would be kept behind. One thing's for sure, the bears of Carroll, New Hampshire can count on Thomas to keep a watchful, loving eye over them.